Imagine this. A young groom walks out of his own wedding reception and never comes back. His car is left untouched in the parking lot. His phone goes silent. His new bride is left wandering the grounds in her gown, mascara streaked from tears, as police are called to what just hours before had been a ballroom filled with dancing and laughter. Some guests whispered it was a kidnapping. Others thought the groom had staged his own disappearance. But as investigators would soon discover, the truth behind that night was far stranger and far darker than anyone could have imagined. Welcome to Criminal Minds Archives. If you love gripping true crime stories told with every twist and turn, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. On a mild spring evening in April 2012, 29-year-old Ethan Ward stood at the centers of a lavish reception hall in Richmond, Virginia. Surrounded by friends, family, and his radiant bride, he had just exchanged vows in a ceremony that seemed picture perfect. Champagne glasses clinked, a live band played gentle jazz, and laughter floated through the chandeliers of the grand ballroom. By every measure, Ethan was a man stepping into a bright new future. He was well-liked, ambitious, and worked as a financial analyst. His new wife, Clara Matthews, a 27-year-old elementary school teacher, was described by everyone as kind and grounded. Their wedding had been meticulously planned, from the ivory roses lining the aisle to the towering three-tier cake. Nothing seemed out of place. But sometime after 11 p.m., Ethan excused himself from the reception hall. Guests assumed he was stepping out for air or preparing for the couple's midnight send-off. Minutes passed, then an hour. When midnight arrived, concern spread. Ethan's car was still parked outside. His wallet and phone had been left behind. And by 1:30 a.m., Clara, still in her gown, was frantically making calls while guests searched the hotel grounds. By 2 a.m., the fairy tale wedding had transformed into a full-fledged missing person investigation. The first whispers began spreading almost immediately. Had Ethan been kidnapped? Was this a ransom situation? Or had the groom chosen the cruelest possible moment to vanish on purpose? Detectives arriving on the scene faced the same troubling questions. And as the night bled into morning, one fact became clear. No one knew where Ethan Ward had gone. The perfect wedding had turned into a crime scene. But was it really a kidnapping? Or something much stranger? The Richmond Police Department treated Ethan Ward's disappearance with urgency. A groom vanishing on his wedding night was not just unusual, it was sensational. Within hours, the media had already begun circling. Reporters called it the wedding night mystery, and by morning, the couple's smiling wedding photo was plastered across local news. For Detective Laura Henderson, one of the first investigators on the case, the scene was unnerving. She later described the reception hall as frozen in time, half-eaten cake on plates, a champagne flute still resting on the DJ booth, the bride's bouquet abandoned on a chair. What should have been remnants of joy were now silent evidence of something darker. The first person detectives turned to was Clara. Still in her wedding dress, she was exhausted, trembling, and tearful. She told police she last saw Ethan around 11:05 p.m. when he leaned over during a conversation and whispered he was stepping outside for just a minute. She said she assumed he was going to check on something with the valet or grab fresh air before they did their grand exit. I wasn't worried at first, she said, but after 15 minutes, then 30, I just knew something was wrong. Ethan wouldn't leave me like that, not on our wedding night. Detectives noted her shock seemed genuine. Her makeup had smeared, her hands shook, and her voice cracked repeatedly. But they also knew better than to take appearances at face value. In many cases of sudden disappearances, those closest to the victim often held the key or the motive. Interviews with family painted Ethan as devoted and responsible. His mother described him as steady, the kind of son who never did anything reckless. His best man, however, admitted Ethan had seemed distracted during parts of the reception. He smiled, he danced, but every now and then, it was like his mind drifted somewhere else. I thought it was just wedding nerves. Some guests recalled seeing Ethan step into the hallway that led to the side parking lot. But after that, no one could place him. The hotel's main security cameras, frustratingly, did not cover the exact exit he was believed to have used. When officers searched the parking area, they found Ethan's silver Honda Accord parked in its original spot. His wallet, phone, and keys were all accounted for inside the hotel suite reserved for the couple. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no dropped belongings that would suggest a violent abduction. It was as though he had simply walked off into the night and vanished. Detectives considered three immediate possibilities. Kidnapping. Could Ethan have been forcibly taken? The lack of ransom demand or evidence of struggle made this uncertain, but it remained plausible. Voluntary disappearance. Could Ethan have chosen to walk away from his new marriage? Investigators quietly explored whether he had doubts about Clara or hidden financial or personal troubles. Foul play from within. Was someone at the wedding responsible? A jilted lover, jealous guest, or even a family dispute? Police knew weddings sometimes unearthed old rivalries. Each theory carried disturbing implications. When detectives pulled Ethan's phone records, something caught their attention. At 10:52 p.m., just minutes before he left the reception, Ethan received a call from an unknown prepaid number. The call lasted only 30 seconds. No voicemail, no follow-up. Clara claimed she hadn't noticed the call and insisted Ethan didn't mention it. But detectives flagged it immediately. Who was trying to reach him, and why, right before he vanished? By the second day, the case had grown more complicated. With no ransom note, no eyewitnesses, and no crime scene evidence, the media frenzy only fueled speculation. Some outlets leaned toward the runaway groom theory, while others played up the possibility of a sinister kidnapping. For Clara, the spotlight became unbearable. Cameras followed her every move. When she tearfully pleaded for Ethan's safe return in front of reporters, some viewers described her as genuinely devastated. Others thought her behavior was oddly restrained, too controlled for a woman whose husband had just vanished. Theories were multiplying, and then detectives uncovered something that cracked open a new angle. Ethan had been keeping a secret from Clara, one that could explain why he walked out of that ballroom and never came back. Detective Laura Henderson's team didn't have much physical evidence, but what they did have phone records, witness interviews, and fragments of testimony began to chip away at the perfect wedding night illusion. What they uncovered suggested that Ethan Ward wasn't just a groom swept up in a random disappearance. He was a man carrying secrets. When investigators pulled Ethan's financial records, they discovered something that startled even his family. For months leading up to the wedding, Ethan had been withdrawing large sums of cash, $500 here, $1,000 there, totaling over $18,000. The money had not gone toward the wedding. Clara's parents had covered most of the expenses, and Ethan's contributions were modest, nor had the funds appeared in joint accounts. Where had it gone? Detectives suspected gambling, or perhaps debts Ethan didn't want to admit. But when they interviewed his co-workers at the financial firm, a different picture emerged. One colleague confided that Ethan had been acting paranoid in recent weeks, sometimes stepping away from his desk to take whispered phone calls. One co-worker recalled Ethan saying cryptically, "I need to get this sorted before the wedding. Once I'm married, it won't just be me on the line anymore." While police combed through Ethan's financials, another revelation landed like a bombshell. A bridesmaid approached detectives privately 2 days after the disappearance. Nervously twisting her bracelet, she admitted she had seen Ethan in the weeks before the wedding, not just with Clara, but with another woman. The bridesmaid described bumping into him at a downtown cafe. Ethan hadn't noticed her at first. He was seated with a young brunette, laughing in a way that seemed too familiar. When the bridesmaid called out to him, Ethan had looked startled. He brushed it off, introducing the woman only as a friend. Detectives now had to consider, was this friend connected to Ethan's vanishing act? Was she the reason he walked out of his own reception? News of Ethan's possible double life reached Clara quickly, and reporters pounced. Standing outside her parents' home, microphones in her face, she broke down. "I don't care about rumors," she sobbed. "I just want Ethan home. If he was hiding something, I deserve to know. But I don't believe he would abandon me. Not like this." Behind closed doors, however, detectives weren't convinced. they noticed inconsistencies in Clara's timeline. For example, Clara first claimed she hadn't noticed Ethan's mysterious 10:52 p.m. phone call. But when detectives pressed, she admitted she had seen him glance at his phone, frown, and step away. She said she assumed it was just a friend congratulating him. Why downplay such a detail unless she knew more? On the fourth night of Ethan's disappearance, Clara received a phone call at her parents' house. She answered on speaker, with detectives present. The voice on the other end was male, distorted, and brief. "You'll never see Ethan again. Forget about him." The line went dead before tracing could lock in a location. Detectives examined Clara's reaction carefully. She trembled, pressed her face into her mother's shoulder, and wept. Was it genuine terror or a performance? More importantly, was this proof of kidnapping? Or a calculated misdirection to make it look like kidnapping? Then came the first real lead. A security camera across the street from the hotel belonging to a bank caught grainy footage at approximately 11:20 p.m., minutes after Ethan was last seen. The footage showed a man in a tuxedo walking quickly across the lot, followed by a second shadowy figure a short distance behind. The quality was too poor to confirm Ethan's identity, but the timing matched. Had someone lured Ethan outside and followed him into the night? Or, and this was the theory that began haunting Detective Henderson, had Ethan arranged this entire scene to make it look like a kidnapping, with an accomplice waiting to spirit him away? By the end of the first week, the case had twisted into a labyrinth of half-truths and speculation. Ethan had been secretly withdrawing thousands of dollars. He might have been seeing another woman before the wedding. Clara's statements showed small but suspicious inconsistencies. An anonymous, distorted phone call suggested someone wanted Ethan gone, and a shadowy figure appeared to follow him into the darkness. The media dubbed it the Groom who vanished. Headlines alternated between tragic mystery and salacious scandal. But for detectives, the most unsettling detail was also the simplest. Ethan had left without his phone, wallet, or keys. Why would a man planning to run vanish without essentials? Unless, of course, someone else was controlling his exit. Theories began to collide. Some investigators leaned toward kidnapping for debt-related reasons. Others whispered Ethan had staged it all to escape a life he no longer wanted. But the truth was buried deeper than anyone realized, and the next discovery would turn the case on its head. Because a week after Ethan's disappearance, a body was pulled from the James River. 7 days after Ethan Ward vanished from his own wedding reception, a jogger along the banks of the James River spotted something tangled in reeds near the waterline. At first, he thought it was driftwood, but as he drew closer, he froze. It was a body. Authorities rushed to the scene. The corpse was waterlogged, its tuxedo shirt shredded by current, but the face was unmistakable. The missing groom had been found. Forensic pathologists at the Richmond Medical Examiner's Office worked quickly. Initial examination suggested drowning. There were no obvious gunshot wounds or knife marks. But what did stand out were faint bruises along Ethan's wrists, as if he had been restrained, and a blow to the back of his skull that was consistent with being struck by a blunt object. The coroner's report was chilling. Cause of death, drowning. Contributing factors, blunt force trauma, possible restraint. Manner of death, undetermined, could be accident, suicide, or homicide. This ambiguity fueled even more speculation. Had Ethan been struck, restrained, and then dumped in the river? Or had he staged his disappearance, only for it to end tragically when things went wrong? The discovery of Ethan's body should have brought closure. Instead, it turned the spotlight hotter on Clara. Detectives noted that in the weeks since Ethan's disappearance, Clara had given multiple interviews, alternating between pleas for his safe return and angry denials of the runaway groom theory. Now, with his body confirmed, public opinion split sharply. Some pitied her as a grieving bride. Others whispered she might have played a role. After all, Clara stood to inherit Ethan's life insurance policy, which investigators discovered had recently been increased to $250,000, just weeks before the wedding. When questioned, Clara insisted the policy was routine, arranged by Ethan himself through his employer. She maintained she had no idea why he vanished or how he ended up in the river. Still, detectives couldn't ignore the possibility. Did she know more than she was saying? The search for the mysterious brunette Ethan was seen with finally bore fruit. Detectives traced her through cafe security footage and credit card records. Her name was Rachel Sloan, a 25-year-old paralegal. When confronted, Rachel admitted she and Ethan had been romantically involved for nearly a year. But she claimed Ethan broke things off a month before the wedding, saying he was committed to Clara. Rachel insisted she had nothing to do with his disappearance. In fact, she said Ethan had been on edge in their final weeks, constantly checking over his shoulder, convinced someone was after him. Detectives pressed her for details. Who could he have meant? Rachel didn't know, but she did recall one alarming statement. Ethan told me if anything happened to him, it wouldn't be an accident. The financial withdrawals that puzzled detectives suddenly made more sense when paired with Rachel's testimony. A deeper dive into Ethan's bank records revealed connections to offshore accounts and cash transfers linked to an illegal sports betting ring. It seemed Ethan wasn't just hiding an affair, he was hiding a dangerous debt. A confidential informant later confirmed Ethan owed thousands to a bookie with a reputation for violent enforcement. Detectives began to believe Ethan's disappearance might have been less about love and more about money. Meanwhile, technicians reanalyzed the grainy bank security footage. After enhancing frames, they confirmed the man in the tuxedo was indeed Ethan. The shadowy figure following him, however, could not be identified. The stride was deliberate, the distance close. Detectives suspected this was Ethan meeting his bookie or someone sent to collect. But if so, why wasn't his body discovered sooner? Had he been held somewhere before being dumped in the river? Just as investigators leaned toward a gambling-related homicide, the case twisted again. Clara received a second anonymous call. This time, the male voice said clearly, "Ethan knew what he owed. He paid the price. Stay quiet, or you'll pay it too." Detectives traced the call to a disposable phone tower near the industrial docks. No camera coverage, no suspects. But the threat added weight to the theory Ethan's death was linked to debts and dangerous people. Piecing the timeline together, detectives proposed a chilling scenario. Ethan receives the mysterious 10:52 p.m. call during the reception. He leaves minutes later, walking into the parking lot. He meets someone tied to his debts. He is assaulted, restrained, and ultimately dumped in the James River. But there was still one gaping hole. How had no one at the wedding noticed the struggle? And why did Ethan leave without his phone or wallet? Unless, as one detective suggested, Ethan intended to meet someone secretly that night. And if that was true, then the question wasn't who forced Ethan to leave his own reception. The question was, why did Ethan walk out willingly, knowing it might cost him everything? The truth, when it finally came out, was stranger and darker than anyone expected. The discovery of Ethan Ward's body should have ended the investigation, but Detective Laura Henderson couldn't shake one detail. Ethan had left his phone, wallet, and keys behind. For a man in debt, possibly running for his life, that made no sense, unless someone had convinced him to walk away without them. That nagging detail would unravel the entire case. 2 months after Ethan's death, police arrested a low-level enforcer named Derek Coleman during a raid on an illegal gambling operation. During interrogation, Derek admitted he had done work for a local bookie who went by the name Vic. When pressed about Ethan, Derek hesitated, then confessed. On the night of the wedding, Ethan had agreed to meet Vic's crew outside the reception hall. He owed them nearly $30,000. Derek claimed Ethan promised he would pay in full after the wedding, once his accounts merged with Clara's and his new father-in-law's loan cleared. But Vic didn't believe him. The bookie wanted a show of control. According to Derek, Ethan was struck, threatened, and forced into a waiting ban. He was kept alive for nearly 2 days in an abandoned warehouse before Vic ordered his body dumped into the James River as a warning to other debtors. The anonymous calls to Clara? Those were meant to scare her away from pressing the case too far. Detectives also uncovered that Rachel Sloan, Ethan's former mistress, wasn't just a bystander. Though not involved in his death, she had known about his debts and had tried, unsuccessfully, to convince him to skip the wedding entirely. Her cafe meetings with him in the weeks before weren't about romance. They were desperate attempts to talk him out of going through with a marriage that would tie Clara into his mess. Rachel later testified that Ethan believed marriage would give him stability, maybe even protection. But in reality, it only made him an easier target. His new wealth and insurance policy marked him as more valuable dead than alive. For Clara, the truth was both devastating and humiliating. She had been blindsided by her husband's secret life, the debts, the mistress, the paranoia he'd hidden so carefully. In her final statement to the press, Clara's voice shook as she said, "I thought I was marrying the love of my life, but the man I married that night was already gone. He had been living a double life, and he didn't trust me enough to tell me. I grieve for the Ethan I thought I knew, but I also grieve for the life we'll never have because of choices he made in secret." The image of the bride in her gown, waiting in vain for a groom who would never return, became the haunting symbol of the case. Vic, the bookie, was eventually arrested on racketeering charges. While prosecutors tied him to Ethan's death through witness testimony and Derek Coleman's cooperation, direct evidence was thin. In the end, Vic received a 25-year federal sentence for organized crime, though not specifically for Ethan's murder. For Clara and Ethan's family, that outcome felt hollow. There was no trial that neatly closed the book, no final verdict of guilt for Ethan's drowning. Only a messy, tangled conclusion, one that left as many scars as answers. The story of Ethan Ward became a cautionary tale in Richmond. Local papers ran headlines like, "The Groom Who Gambled with His Life," and "Till Death Do Us Part." For true crime observers, it highlighted how appearances, the fairy tale wedding, the smiling photos, the champagne toast can mask darker realities lurking beneath. A groom in a tuxedo, a bride in white lace, in a ballroom of celebration can all be shattered in an instant by secrets, debts, and dangerous choices. Ethan Ward's disappearance began as a chilling mystery. A groom who walked out of his wedding reception and never came back. For a week, the city speculated about kidnappings, betrayals, and runaway grooms. But the truth in the end was not one of romance or cold feet. It was the story of a man trapped between love and lies, whose debts pulled him into a world he couldn't escape. The question wasn't whether Ethan had been kidnapped. The real question was whether he had been kidnapped by others, or by his own secrets long before that night. This was Criminal Minds Archives. If you found this case as haunting as we did, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next story where the truth is always stranger than fiction.